Every man watching this video has felt the suffocating weight of a relationship where his independence was slowly strangled by someone who claimed to love him, but actually feared his strength. You have experienced that moment when you realized you were more afraid of being alone than of being with someone who was making you miserable. And this fear kept you trapped in dynamics that were slowly destroying your self-respect and personal power. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who dared to challenge every comfortable lie about human nature, warned over a century ago that most people prefer the familiar prison of dependence to the terrifying freedom of solitude. But he also revealed the secret that will transform your relationships forever. What happens when you stop running from solitude and start embracing it as the key to unshakable personal power? When you discover that your absence can become more valuable than your presence ever was. When you were desperate and needy. Stay with me, because what you are about to learn will change how you see yourself, your relationships, and the incredible power you possess when you are no longer afraid to be alone. Most people today live in constant fear of being alone because they have never learned to face themselves honestly. They jump from relationship to relationship like drowning swimmers grasping at floating debris, desperate to avoid the uncomfortable silence that comes when no one else is around to distract them from their own thoughts. This fear runs so deep that they would rather stay in toxic relationships than risk spending a single weekend alone with their own company. The modern world has programmed us to believe that being single means being incomplete, that we need another person to validate our existence and make us feel worthy of love. But this desperate need for constant companionship is exactly what Nietzsche identified as herd mentality, the tendency to follow the crowd rather than forge your own path. When you observe how most people behave in relationships, you will notice they lose themselves completely in the process. They abandon their hobbies, they change their opinions to match their partner, they sacrifice their dreams to keep the peace. This is not love. This is weakness disguised as devotion. Nietzsche understood that true strength comes from the ability to stand alone, without needing others to complete you. The man who can enjoy his own company, who can spend hours in solitude without feeling anxious or incomplete, this man possesses a power that most people will never understand. He becomes dangerous to those who depend on others for their sense of self, because he represents what they fear most, the possibility of being truly independent. The panic you see in people when faced with solitude reveals the depth of their inner emptiness. They fill their lives with noise, social media, constant texting, meaningless conversations, anything to avoid confronting the reality of who they are when no one else is watching. But here lies the secret that Nietzsche knew. Solitude is not punishment, it is privilege. It is in those quiet moments alone that you discover your authentic self, your real desires, your genuine thoughts, without the influence of others trying to shape you into what they need you to be. When you master the art of being alone, you become immune to the manipulation tactics that work on everyone else. Nietzsche believed that true power comes from the ability to overcome yourself, to constantly evolve beyond your current limitations and become something greater. This process of self-overcoming requires solitude because you cannot hear your own voice. When you are constantly surrounded by the opinions and expectations of others, when you choose to be alone, you create space for honest self-reflection, the kind that reveals your weaknesses without sugar-coating them. Most people avoid this uncomfortable truth about themselves because it requires admitting that they are not yet who they want to become. But Nietzsche understood that this discomfort is necessary for growth. It is the price you pay for authentic transformation. In solitude, you begin to separate your authentic desires from the desires that others have planted in your mind. You start to question why you want certain things, whether your goals are truly yours or just borrowed from society, family, or past relationships. This process can be disturbing because you might discover that much of what you thought you wanted was actually programming from external sources. However, this realization is liberating because it allows you to choose your own path consciously, rather than sleepwalking through life following someone else's script. The man who can sit alone with his thoughts and honestly evaluate his life becomes the master of his own destiny. True self-mastery emerges when you no longer need external validation to feel confident in your choices. You develop your own internal compass, your own set of values, your own definition of success that does not depend on what others think. This is what Nietzsche meant by becoming your own master, creating yourself according to your own vision rather than accepting the version that others want you to be. When you stop seeking approval from others, something profound happens in your relationships. The entire power dynamic shifts in your favor. Most people are so desperate for validation that they will compromise their values, change their behavior, and sacrifice their authenticity just to get a few crumbs of acceptance from someone else. But when you become comfortable with yourself and no longer need others to confirm your worth, you gain a level of power that most people cannot comprehend. You stop being needy. You stop chasing. You stop trying to prove yourself to anyone. This shift is immediately noticeable and often deeply unsettling to those around you, because they are used to people who can be controlled through the promise or withdrawal of approval. Women especially are accustomed to men who seek their validation constantly, who change themselves to win favor, who become anxious when they sense disapproval. When you no longer play this game, it creates confusion and often panic, because their usual methods of control no longer work on you. You become unpredictable, in the best possible way, not because you are unstable, but because you operate from your own internal reference point, rather than reacting to external pressures. This independence is magnetic because it represents something rare in today's world. A person who cannot be easily manipulated or controlled through emotional leverage. The beauty of this transformation is that you attract higher quality people into your life while naturally repelling those who were only interested in controlling you. When you no longer need validation, you paradoxically become more valuable to others, because scarcity creates desire and authentic confidence is increasingly scarce. In our validation-seeking culture, most relationships today are built on mutual dependency rather than genuine connection. To incomplete people trying to use each other to fill the voids in their lives. When you choose solitude and develop inner strength, these fragile foundations begin to crack because the relationship was never based on authentic love but on need and fear. Your partner may have become comfortable with your previous neediness because it gave them a sense of control and security. Knowing that you depended on them for emotional stability made them feel important and irreplaceable. But when you no longer need them in the same desperate way, they often interpret this growth as rejection or abandonment, even though you have simply become more complete as an individual. Nietzsche understood that weak connections cannot survive the test of individual strength because they were built on weakness in the first place. When you stop being emotionally reactive, when you no longer seek constant reassurance, when you can be perfectly content alone, these changes expose the shallow nature of relationships that were based on codependency. Your partner may panic because they realize they no longer have the same level of influence over your emotions and decisions. They might try to pull you back into old patterns through drama, guilt trips, or emotional manipulation because your independence threatens their sense of security and control within the relationship dynamic. This process acts as a natural filter that separates genuine connections from parasitic ones. Healthy partners will respect and admire your growth, while unhealthy ones will try to sabotage it because they prefer you weak and dependent. True love celebrates your strength, while false love fears it and tries to diminish it. Nietzsche's concept of will to power is not about dominating others, but about mastering yourself and creating your own meaning in life. When you embrace solitude, you tap into this fundamental drive to become the author of your own existence rather than a character in someone else's story. Most people live according to values they never consciously chose. They follow the moral framework handed down by their parents, society, or romantic partners without ever questioning whether these beliefs truly serve their highest good. But when you spend time alone, you begin to examine these inherited values and decide which ones align with your authentic self and which ones you need to discard or transform. Creating your own values requires courage because it means taking full responsibility for your choices and their consequences. You can no longer blame others for your unhappiness or use external authorities as excuses for your decisions. This process of value creation is deeply threatening to those who prefer to follow established rules rather than think for themselves. When you start living according to your own moral compass rather than seeking approval from others, You become unpredictable and uncontrollable, qualities that make weak people uncomfortable because they cannot anticipate or manipulate your behavior using conventional social pressures. The will to power manifests as the drive to constantly overcome your previous limitations and evolve into something greater. In solitude, you discover what you truly want from life rather than what others expect you to want. You develop the strength to pursue these authentic desires, even when they contradict popular opinion or disappoint people who preferred the old version of yourself. Solitude acts like a magnifying glass that reveals the true nature of every relationship in your life by showing you how people react when you are no longer constantly available to meet their needs. When you step back and create space, you quickly discover who genuinely cares about your well-being and who was simply using you for emotional support, validation, entertainment, or other benefits. The people who truly love you will respect your need for alone time and will be there when you choose to reconnect, while those who were exploiting your availability will become angry, manipulative, or disappear entirely when you are no longer serving their purposes. This revelation can be painful because you might discover that relationships you thought were solid were actually built on convenience rather than genuine affection. Some people will try to guilt you back into your old patterns by claiming you have changed or become distant, but this is usually a manipulation tactic designed to restore their access to whatever they were getting from you. Nietzsche warned that most people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, and the truth about many relationships is that they are transactional rather than authentic. When you stop providing the constant emotional labor, attention, or resources that others became accustomed to receiving from you, their true colors become visible. The beauty of this process is that it clears space in your life for higher quality connections, while teaching you to value your own company above relationships that drain your energy. You learn to distinguish between people who love you for who you are and people who love you for what you do for them. Codependent relationships feel comfortable because they create the illusion of safety and predictability. You know exactly what is expected of you, and your partner provides constant feedback about your worth based on how well you meet their needs. This dynamic becomes addictive because it eliminates the uncertainty and responsibility that comes with independent decision-making. You trade your freedom for the false security of knowing someone else will always tell you what to do, how to feel, and who to be. But Nietzsche understood that comfort is the enemy of growth, that true strength develops only when you face uncertainty and discomfort without someone else to lean on for support. When you choose isolation over codependency, you enter unknown territory, where you must learn to trust your own judgment and develop internal sources of strength. This process is initially uncomfortable because you no longer have someone else to blame for your problems or to make decisions for you. When life becomes difficult, you must face your fears, insecurities, and weaknesses without the buffer of another person's presence to soften the impact. Many people avoid this challenge because they would rather remain weak and comfortable than become strong through temporary discomfort. But this choice keeps them trapped in cycles of dependency that prevent authentic personal development. The growth that occurs in solitude cannot happen in codependent relationships because growth requires space to make mistakes, to experiment with new ideas, and to discover who you are when no one else is watching. Codependency stunts this development by keeping you focused on maintaining the relationship rather than developing yourself as an individual with unique potential and purpose. Nietzsche identified two types of morality that govern human behavior: master morality and slave morality. Slave morality emerges from weakness and resentment. It teaches people to suppress their own desires and needs in order to gain approval from others who hold power over them. In romantic relationships, this manifests as the belief that love requires complete self-sacrifice, that you must always put your partner's needs before your own, and that any form of self-interest is selfish or wrong. This mindset creates relationships where one person becomes the master, who demands constant attention and accommodation, while the other becomes the slave, who provides it without question or reciprocation. Most men today operate from slave morality in their relationships because they have been taught that being a good partner means becoming a doormat who never sets boundaries or prioritizes his own well-being. They believe that love means saying yes to everything their partner wants and no to everything they want for themselves. This creates an unhealthy dynamic where the woman loses respect for the man, because deep down she knows that someone who does not value himself cannot truly value her either. Nietzsche warned that slave morality makes people weak and resentful over time, because they suppress their authentic nature to maintain relationships that are fundamentally unequal. When you embrace solitude, you begin to develop master morality, the confidence to pursue your own goals and values without needing permission or approval from others. You learn to set boundaries, to say no when necessary, and to prioritize your own growth and happiness as prerequisites for being able to genuinely love another person from a position of strength rather than weakness. Voluntary isolation is fundamentally different from loneliness because it is a conscious choice made from a position of strength rather than a circumstance imposed by external forces. When you choose to spend time alone, you create opportunities for deep self-reflection that are impossible when you are constantly responding to the needs and expectations of other people. This practice builds inner strength because it forces you to confront your thoughts, emotions, and motivations without the distraction of social interaction or the comfort of external validation. You learn to sit with discomfort, to process difficult emotions independently, and to find solutions to your problems using your own resources, rather than depending on others to fix or manage your internal world. The strength that develops through voluntary isolation is different from the superficial confidence that comes from external achievements or social approval because it is rooted in self-knowledge and self-acceptance. You discover what you are capable of handling alone, what your true limits are, and what resources you possess that you never knew existed. When you were constantly leaning on others for support, this inner strength becomes unshakable because it does not depend on external circumstances or other people's opinions. It comes from your proven ability to survive and thrive in solitude without losing your sanity or sense of purpose. Regular periods of isolation also teach you to distinguish between your authentic voice and the voices of others that have taken up residence in your mind. You learn to identify which thoughts are truly yours and which are borrowed from family, friends, media, or past relationships. This clarity allows you to make decisions based on your genuine desires, rather than unconscious programming. The ultimate demonstration of personal power occurs when your absence creates more impact than your presence ever did. When people realize what they have lost only after you have withdrawn your attention and energy from their lives. This phenomenon happens because most people take consistent availability for granted. They assume that someone who is always there will always be there, so they invest minimal effort in appreciating or reciprocating the value that person provides. When you master the art of strategic absence, you force others to confront the reality of what your presence actually meant to them. Suddenly they must face the void that your withdrawal has created in their daily experience. Nietzsche understood that scarcity creates value while abundance breeds contempt. When you are constantly available and eager to please you inadvertently, teach people to undervalue your contributions to their lives. But when you step back and focus on your own growth and interests, you create space that allows others to miss you, to remember why they enjoyed your company, and to recognize the unique qualities you brought to the relationship. This shift often triggers panic in people who had become comfortable with your predictable availability, because they realize they cannot control or manipulate someone who is perfectly content without their approval or attention. The power of absence works because it demonstrates that you have options, that you are not desperate for any particular relationship, and that you value your own time and energy enough to be selective about how you invest them. When your absence becomes more compelling than your presence, you have achieved true independence and transformed from someone who chases value into someone who creates it. When you truly understand Nietzsche's teachings about solitude and independence, you realize that choosing yourself over needy relationships is not selfish. It is necessary for becoming the kind of man who can offer genuine value to others from a position of strength rather than weakness. The panic you create in others when you embrace solitude reveals how much power you were unconsciously giving away by being constantly available and seeking their approval. True strength emerges when you no longer need anyone else to complete you. When you can walk away from any situation that does not serve your highest good, and when your absence becomes more valuable than your presence ever was when you were desperate and needy, ask yourself this provocative question. If you disappeared from everyone's life tomorrow, would they miss the real you? Or would they just miss what you were doing for them? If you cannot honestly say they would miss your authentic self, then you have been living as a servant rather than a master of your own destiny. The time has come to reclaim your power through solitude and discover who you really are, when no one else is watching or influencing your choices. If this message resonates with your soul and you want to continue learning how to build unshakable inner strength while mastering the dynamics of power in relationships, then subscribe to this channel and join thousands of men who are choosing growth over comfort and independence over codependency.